So, let us pick up from the same slide where he said, where we were looking at this interaction, and let me give you an example. If you talk of people, they will always say there is a lot of corruption. Now, how does this corruption build up? Maybe you have gone to an office and you want to get your work done, which is for some reason not happening, and maybe you have heard that by giving some extra money to the person, things will get done. Now, what do? You have not done it any time before, but your mind, your dopamine is pushing, because you want to get your work done. Getting that work done will be your that immediate gratification or pleasure or whatever, and then what you it's not, it's getting obstructed. Mind is always in a hurry, it cannot delay its gratification, it has to jump and get everything done very fast, and then you get an idea of giving some bribe. So, your mind pushes, you may gather courage to give it a bribe. If that person takes a bribe and finishes your work immediately, you learn a new way of doing it, and your behavior will get changed. The society will call it as a corruption, but most people get their work done and do not see anything wrong, because most people are doing it. Again, that issue of normal and abnormal comes in. If most people are doing it, by one definition, that is normal. So, if most people are giving bribe and most people are taking, it is normal. So, but the societal larger rule is that this is corruption. But you have already reshaped your behavior, voluntarily or involuntarily. Voluntarily, obviously, nobody is forcing you to do that. But this behavior and the feedback is reward. But suppose you have given a bribe and the officer just throws you out. He said, I am not a person who will take a bribe, and that would be a punishment. Your work may still get done, but with certain amount of insult being delivered to you. In that case, you are not going to do it, and this whole idea of the new cognitive framework, which was giving you immediate gratification of getting your job done, delinks. So, next time if you have to do it, you will remember that insult and you will not do it. This is the normal thing, and then your mind may tell you that whatever people are doing, I am not going to take insult. This is the seed of change, but maybe you are not able to apply your cognitive framework and your whole thought process to this bigger idea, and then you say fine, it's all right, once insulted, never mind. So, at that time your cognition rules up your emotion and your basic instinct. The basic instinct is that if you have failed, do not try it again, and your mind will tell you it's, but in other circumstances, like if you have to give an exam and clear a competition, once you prepare, which is your cognitive thing which is pushing you, your emotion is also into it, that you want to get selected as an civil services officer. You give an exam after 1 year of preparation and you do not succeed. So, this will be entirely different of that corrupt practice. People will tell you do not give bribe, even once you have got insulted, do not do it, although a lot of people may be doing it. But here people will tell you that even if you have failed, you should try it again, because that is the right way of doing it. So, that brings in another concept, which if you remember we were talking about the normalcy and abnormalcy of context. So, same repetitiveness, but these are all upper layers of behavioral manifestation. The baseline still remains the same, and the baseline is that your behavior was a result of your thought and emotion, which is coming from the brain, your experiences, your circumstances, your value system, which are again at a higher level of cognitive processes. You have acted on environment has responded in different contexts depending on the context, and the brain process again is shaped by this. Once you fail and then you try for giving a bribe again, is like going against that small inner voice, in Gandhi's words. I am slowly introducing Gandhi to you. your mind is saying that don't do this, but the pressing urgency of getting your job done pushes you to do the same act again. On the contrary, you may really not want to go and do and prepare again for your IAS exams, because you think that once is enough, I will change the course of my career. So, the context varies, the impression of context on your mind varies, the template is the same, but these are the new ways of snapshots of stories. So, this is how it is happening. Now, you can relate this thing to whatever we have talked in the previous lectures. So, as we have talked about, it is genetic, you have a temperament, early influences, stressful life events, mental disorders. So, if you apply all this to this whole issue of vices and dependence, addiction, a few facts which are very clear, which are biological and psychological facts. And this is what I said, that the whole drama of socio-cultural impression of addiction and the moral responsibility of transformation posed on the person vis-a-vis the biological pressure. The person at risk of dependence has predisposition to usage. There is already a tendency within a person, probably it is genetic, like lot of other things have come off genes from millions of years. We all have shared genes. This risk of addiction has already a predisposition to usage. Certain personality factors have been associated with the risk of addiction, which are largely I am telling you. Impulsivity. That impulsivity means this tendency to get things done immediately. The gratification, the sense of fulfillment cannot be postponed. It has to be then and there. Low risk avoidant. When you are going for addiction, you are already transgressing the normal boundaries. Normally people would avoid the risk, but these people have the brain processing and the brain firing does not tell them much about avoiding risk. Probably it is a function of the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes which evolved at around 1920, but by that time probably the addictive behavior is already set in. Addictive behavior, maybe it starts early and the brain matures lately, and so the whole brain maturity of, so if the person is doing certain thing and the society is telling, but the brain, the part of the brain which is already not developed to control it, also developed in conjunction with it, so it will never tell them that this is wrong. Because if somebody starts something at 25 and already has been brought up in a proper manner of knowing right and wrong or whatever, I am not saying it is absolute right and wrong, but that is how society has told him, and then at that point he may still have more guilt and shame. But if he is doing certain thing from 16, when the brain, the part of the brain which stops is already not fully developed, so when he grows up to 20, his mind has not learned what is right from wrong. And that is why probably the education system and the training and religion and everything says that you start teaching kids, and that is what you can now relate, that why are kids told so many things. Kids are told so many things and they are not left to their own to decide what is wrong, because that is coming from ages. Because society and parents think that what we know, our structure is the right structure, and that is how we should bring up kids, to keep a structure in the society. Society, nobody is running the society is running itself by these rules. Like universe is running through rules, this is also a rule, that you study, you learn good things, good manners, pray, respect elders, do whatever, have your opinion, work, develop a skill, marry, produce children, so that once you produce children you have a sense of responsibility and fall into that rail, and so the society remains. But biology is not listening. Genes are not listening to these rules. They are doing their own experiment. They are pushing for sexuality. They are pushing for this real addiction in the head. And it is important because genes have to propagate species. So if they kill sexuality, how will people reproduce? So genes are not listening to your rules. they will keep pushing and keep trying sexuality in each brain all the time, and that is how it works, whether you like it, you do not like it. With your cognition and with your training and all the baggage of your conditioning, you can balance that expression of that thing vis-a-vis this. Some people cannot, they are genetically, so genes do their experiment, they will allow most people to be falling in line with moderate amount of impulsivity, low, some of them they just try as experiment, probably. Look at it this way, all these people who are out of the fringe are experiments, good or bad is another matter. So, somebody who takes 3 pegs of whiskey and dances wildly may be an embarrassment to the family, but he may be the star in a club. So, again context. So, impulsivity, low risk avoidance because of the brain structure, high reward dependence, that is the immediate kick they get. All of us are looking for some or the other kick. So, these people look for kick of different sort, and novelty seeking. Their mind is never at rest. They just can't go into say 9 to 5 job. They may be doing a 9 to 5 job because of financial compulsions, but it's this sense of incompleteness, this sense of impulsivity, this simmering, seek new things, keep doing something. All of us actually have these things in different measures. So, no human mind, and geneticists will tell you, no human mind does not have what the other person has. There's some amount, some measure will be there, and that again go back to when we are talking of whether there is a illness is a continuum. So, if everybody has the same genes and same tidbits here and there, everybody knows, has felt a repetitive thought process like an obsession, they know what obsessive compulsive disorder. They may be at 0, the obsessive compulsive disordered person may be at 100, it is just that. We all know hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. While you getting up from sleep or going to sleep, sometimes you feel that somebody is calling your voice, your name, there is nobody. They are very well known hallucinations, but they are considered to be physiological hallucinations, hypnopompic and hypnagogic. But will the brain have 10 pathways for different hallucinations? Unlikely. Nature works on economy actually. So, it must be the same common pathway. What becomes an illness and what is not is again a matter of context or maybe crossing the threshold. So, usage, so we all know what impulsivity is, we all know what a risk avoidance is. The usage of certain substances alters the brain chemically and even anatomically. So, now when you use a certain substance or even if you go doing certain things beyond what is required, beyond its utility in space and time, and keep going on and on and on and on, it alters the brain anatomically also. The memories which are formed in brain are the network between neurons, the synapses, and they are in a certain pattern, which that pattern will correspond to one object or experience or face or something in the environment. But if you keep using a certain way of doing it, the synapses will alter. So, these psychological findings have been confirmed more or less by new techniques of imaging. Most molecules of abuse and addiction have corresponding receptors in the brain. Now, whether these receptors have developed because of the usage or they were originally there is a chicken and egg question. They are cannabis receptors. Some of these drugs have been culturally accepted, like cannabis. The cannabis sativa is a plant out of which lot of bhang comes out of it, charas, marijuana, they come out processed from different parts. Similarly, opium, morphine, heroin, brown sugar. The opium and you have heard of opium war. The opium has been culturally used in China and in parts of India. Cannabis is most common form is bhang and ganja which in India, which is you are those of you, however hard the rules may be, but we know the truth. It's available, people use it, not everybody, but some people use it, some people just try it once. Similarly, alcohol, see the amount of alcohol use has gone up in the society in last 15-20 years, and so we don't, alcohol does not have receptors, C2H5OH does not have receptors in the brain, but alcohol interacts with the existing neurotransmitters to create some other chemicals and destabilizing the membrane. And so cannabis has receptor, opioid receptors we very well know. Actually, in fact, if dopamine pushes you to act and explore, the endorphins which work on the opiate receptor, if they go high, they give you a sense of bliss, and that is why different chemicals go in the brain and create different effect. Like LSD creates hallucinations, cannabis can create hallucinations and perceptual disturbances in time, opioids just give you a sense of bliss. But at the end of the day, these neurotransmitters are affected by addictive substances, but most end up activating the pleasure centers of the, you know this, I showed you in the first, the dopamine surge affect this area which is the reward center. So, reward seeking is facilitated by dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, but even if there is a cues about a drug, it can activate for expectation. Now, somebody who takes a certain drug and even if the drug is not there, even the thought of it, even the image of it can do a upsurge of activity. Now, these are another brain areas. You remember I showed you the brain structure, this corpus callosum which connects to it. They are orbitofrontal cortex outside of this brain, this type of areas. These are the thinking brain, the conscious, where the consciousness probably the meaningfulness of the stimulus or the image or the experience which comes from the deep unconscious, it has to navigate among the reward and consequence expectation. Now, this area, like what I was saying, the orbitofrontal cortex. So, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is this area, the inside of it is the orbitofrontal and the anterior cingulate gyrus, which is in between somewhere here. So, both the inside and outside, they have to look at the emotional aspect of this thing, calculate, while the other part has to decide, calculate among the reward and consequences of expectation, and if they know that the consequence of it is bad, it will inhibit the impulse coming, inhibit the impulse which is coming from the need for taking something or need for doing something is coming to the brain, as we talked about those 500 milliseconds, even before it becomes conscious, even before that 200, 300 milliseconds where you are aware of you are going to decide and act on it, the brain has in this ACC and orbitofrontal cortex has already decided from within whether it is going to do it or not. If not, from past experience, it will suppress the need. When this area fails, now this will answer your question. We ask this question, why do people do certain things which we know they are damaging? Actually, their whole suppression, the inhibitory part of the brain is already working at a diminished capacity. So, the consequence of certain behavior, if it is a punishment or reward, that the whole thing blurs up and then they will act and then the whole drama of its consequences will take care. So, the reward centers have been rewarded by gratification and pleasurable activity after a certain act or a drug or something. It pushes you, the dopamine pushes you again and again to do it, when you do it, if the consequences are your thinking brain will suppress it. When the thinking brain is actually working at a diminished capacity, this whole blurring of the reward and punishment happens, and people keep repeating the whole thing. And that brings in the question, why can't they decide and why can't they stop? The more a particular pathway is exercised, the greater is the strength of that pathway. Now, you may think, why am I talking about this habituation thing and this addiction thing? Because this, when you pose it against whatever we have talked, that frame of societal expectation, your cognitive emotional framework, the way your developmental thing and gone, the way your brain processes, how the brain gives you reward and punishment and all that. With the final example of this, we will move on to the real exercise part of it. So, when excess of neurotransmitter is added to the brain system, the brain tries to compensate by getting rid of the excess by negative feedback. The more the import, the harder the brain works to get rid. Over time, importing the desired neurotransmitter to activate the pleasure part becomes a necessity. So, if a certain quanta of neurotransmitter is required to give you a certain pleasure, you, after a period of time, this excess, there is excess of neurotransmitter, the brain tries to get rid of it. In the process, the activation of the pleasure part of the brain becomes a necessity. So, the brain gets into activity, into habit of, so every time a chemical goes in, it interacts with neurotransmitter, it excites, again it goes, it excites. So, brain almost gets into a habit of that neurotransmitter. So, if this does not get it, it has to produce more and more, and that is habituation. The long term effect of substance use and even long term untreated depression can reduce frontal lobe functioning. So, when you look people who have taken drugs or alcohol for a very long time and you observe them closely, there are very few who will be in their perfect cognitive capacity, the judgment gets impaired, they start thinking in a very concrete way, and the whole personality deteriorates. This is partly because the frontal lobes, which we are talking about, the orbitofrontal cortex and all, is already their capacity to decide, to abstract, to problem solve, everything deteriorates. This is the area. Emotional management. Lot of these people who are into addictions become very impulsive and moody and all. Anything which they do in excess. Now, this is the interface between the socio-cultural expectation from the person and the biology which thinks it is a illness. This is the area, frontal lobes, which is most required for recovery, because this is the area where it can plan, which can execute, which can control emotions and reason out the difference between a reward and punishment. And unless you reason out, you are really not going to alter it. So, for recovery or for any change, whether be it addiction or without addiction, frontal lobes are important. So, chronic lower levels of serotonin is one of the chemicals, result in vulnerability to substance abuse. So, depression also has low serotonin. These are very impulsive people who can even attempt suicide. In suicide attempts, serotonin is very low. In some of the substance abuse, serotonin is low. This is the chemical control. So, there is increasing evidence of brain recovery from certain kinds of addiction. Long term heavy alcohol use results in some permanent damage. This is perhaps the most harmful drug. Although people think obviously opioids and cannabis, they are going just and acting on some receptors, and when they are withdrawn, they after some withdrawal symptoms, which is that brain receptors asking for more and more chemical, it settles down. With alcohol damages membrane permanently, it damages the nerve stability, it alters the firing, and But luckily all this can be corrected. Obviously the first thing is you withdraw it. So, whatever you want to change in your life, be it drugs or anything which will talk about transformation, you have to really withdraw that input. This is possible. Drug abusers and addicts do not overtly seem crazy, it seems natural to expect them to wake up and quit. This is where society asks them to be will, assert their will, assert will. Lot of mothers who bring their young ones who teenagers who are into drugs and all, they will say them, please tell them to stop, and I know unless he puts his will he cannot, if he puts his will he can do it. So, will, I asked you a question, where is me and where is the will? So, the will comes back, but because they are not considered to be mentally ill even by the standards of normalcy and abnormalcy, but the diagnostic criteria may say they have a illness. So, this is the confusion. We do not know whether to take a moral stand, tell them that they are bad people, or consider them as weak people who are not able to assert their will, or consider them ill that there is a biology is not allowing. I think it is probably a mixture of everything. And because the areas of the brain that do self reflection, planning and careful listening to feedback are all damaged by substances. The feedback, you work on society so that the environment gives you a feedback. That feedback loop itself is not working, their mind just cannot, the addict loses the ability to invent solution to problems. The frontal lobes, as I said, are greatly affected. Thus, the very thing we are asking them to do is the one thing they will have the greatest difficulty, applying the reason. Neural circuitry of motivated behavior, goal directed behavior to achieve that addiction subjugates. So, your motivation, internet sex addiction, we all know is the new thing, pornography. So, is the brain trainable? Let me again bring back I have shown you the slide. Are there conscious exercises to develop decision making, delayed gratification, sublimate your desires, develop prefrontal cortex to tame the emotion, the reason, taming emotions. It is about the inhibitory firing of cortex. Is it all biological? But can this biology, can this electrical firing, can this the natural process be altered by some external training? Now, that will to external training again comes from the brain itself. So, the big question comes back again at the will and intent when it comes to changing. So, this brings into the basic few stories of our stories as in the building of our final story which we will be talking about, and that is whether we can change ourselves. Why do we wish we have talked? Why, how we will talk about, and so we will talk about it whether the mind is trainable in the next lecture. Thank you.